In May of 1995, HUD took over direct control of the housing authority.
Number one, here in Chicago, I think we'd reached the point of being near the bottom of the abyss. I think also there were local leaders who were willing to be innovative and kind of try and think outside the box and really think about a different vision for what public housing could look like.
4 years of federal receivership allowed the stabilization of CHA finances and improvements in operations, but did little to address the issues of isolation or the deteriorating conditions of the housing. That would only happen when the city of Chicago reassumed control.
Most of it was abandoned. It cost the government $2 million for every abandoned high-rise you had in the city of Chicago. Talk about a waste of money.
And they said that it was actually time for the city to step back in. The city's response to that was, let's step back for just a moment and see what we have and what the conditions might need to be for us to assume local control.
So Bill Clinton gave me the responsibility, but we have an election. Al Gore lost the election, and I went to see George Bush, and he said, well, tell me what your philosophy is. I said, to be very frank, we're going to put our money in. We're going to rebuild the sewers, and we're going to build schools and parks, and he made the commitment like a partnership.
Well, I credit the mayor. I mean, the mayor and I don't always agree, but what I always say is we share the conviction that it's possible to rebuild troubled neighborhoods, and in this case, it's possible to transform public housing.
Government-mandated viability tests had already been conducted. The conclusion was dramatic. Across Chicago, more than 13,700 units failed the test, including each and every high-rise. As a team assembled by City Hall assessed CHA's condition and negotiated terms with HUD, the contours of a bold new direction for public housing were beginning to take shape. On the physical side, the plan for transformation would replace or renovate 25,000 units across the city and promise the right of return to each tenant in good standing that occupied a CHA unit on October 1, 1999. Many traditional family developments and senior buildings were still viable, and each unit would be fully renovated. In areas where blighted high-rises were slated for demolition, a different approach was envisioned.
People returned to this somewhat idealized version of what places like Bronzeville were like back in the 20s and 30s. They were really mixed-income communities.
In the late 90s, West Haven Park and Northtown Village had introduced mixed-income redevelopment of public housing to Chicago. The question was how to take it to scale.
In order to do something of this magnitude, we needed to get a commitment from the federal government in terms of flexibility, in terms of a commitment of funding over a period of time. Well, as you know, it was $1.5 billion over a 10-year period. The city agreed to do a lot of the infrastructure. It was a multi-agency effort.
I arrived on September 10th, and I was immediately told that I was to get 5 transactions closed by December 31st, which is a very daunting challenge. It required public and private partnerships, banks, equity sources, developers, and so all of those parties were going to be very careful to do the due diligence necessary. It would be only at that point these parties would come to yes.
The next thing that we had to do, though, was to convince the community itself that this change was going to take place and look at it as an opportunity now to be able to have access to some services, some things that you never would normally have access to. Where at that time, there was a lot of fear and no trust with the housing authority because of some past promises made that were not kept. And so we really had to convince them that this plan is really going to do everything that you need it to do.
Working groups were constituted for each of the mixed-income redevelopments, which got down to the business of planning how each community would be rebuilt.
What was called a working group was the centerpiece of the planning at each of the new mixed-income sites. And the working group was intended to bring together stakeholders from every perspective.
Working groups included residents, representatives of CHA, HUD, city departments, local political leaders, the Gautreaux receiver and lawyers, and eventually the developers selected by the group to rebuild each community.
You needed people who were actually in charge at the table, who could make the decision at that time so that we didn't have to go back and check with the commissioners or go back and check with this person before we could actually get commitments.
Should we have brick versus frame? Should we have mid-rises? Should we have just single-family homes? Should there be porches? All the way down to the feel and look of the community. And then as developments began to take shape, what would be some of the rules and regulations that would govern all kinds of things like that?
We had a say-so in how we wanted the apartments to look, where we was able to look at it and we could see what they was going to do before they actually made the final plans. It was a great insight for us to be able to have that kind of authority, to be able to have a say-so now.
As the plan for transformation came together, CHA engaged in a wide range of partnerships to leverage financial, political, and philanthropic support. The City of Chicago invested heavily in rebuilding the infrastructure of each neighborhood, delivering new streets and street lighting, sewer and water service, and park facilities. Many communities have also received police and fire stations, enhancing safety, as well as new schools. CHA's collaboration with HUD has flourished over the past decade, spurred by increased flexibility and independence permitted under the Moving to Work program. In the mixed income developments, for-profit real estate developers played a critical role, securing additional layers of private financing to leverage the CHA and city investments. Chicago Philanthropy also stepped up quickly, funding individual initiatives and founding the Partnership for New Communities to devote time, talent, and resources to issues of workforce development, economic development, and community building. As demolition of buildings began across the city, CHA began the process of moving residents either into private apartments with housing choice vouchers or into other CHA buildings that were partially occupied.
Are you happy about the change that's going on about leaving Stateway?
Well, that's my home. You know, I can't say I'm happy about it because that's where, when I was 1 or 2, I remember when I grew up there, you see. But everybody got to change. You gotta look forward to change, that's all.